He kept every letter. Not in a drawer, not in some forgotten box in an attic. He simply never answered them. Once a year, for years, an envelope arrived at his door, and inside it was the same plea, written in a hand that had once made America laugh until it cried. I just wanted to talk. No reply ever came back. Not a call, not a note, not even a single word passed between two people who had once been closer than family. And when the man who ignored those letters finally closed his eyes for the last time in 2005, the woman who wrote them didn't cry because a legend had died. She cried because she never got the chance to ask him why. This is a story of the coldest silence in show business. A silence so complete, so absolute, that an entire industry learned to fear more than any scream, any lawsuit, any headline. Because when Johnny Carson decided you no longer existed, you simply stopped existing. Careers didn't end with a bang. They ended with a wave that never came, a phone that never rang, a name quietly lifted out of history, like it had never been spoken at all. There was a chair, just one chair, positioned a few feet from a desk under hot studio lights, and for 30 years it was the most powerful piece of furniture in America. If you sat in it, your life could change before the credits rolled. Comedians who'd been sleeping in their cars were suddenly booked solid. Actors who'd been begging for auditions were suddenly being begged themselves. All because a man with silver hair and a sly, unreadable grin decided, in a single unspoken motion, that you belonged. That motion had a name. Insiders called it the wave, the small gesture Carson made after a stand-up set, inviting them to sit beside him instead of walking off into obscurity. It looked like nothing. It was everything. Jerry Seinfeld built a career on it. David Letterman built a career on it. An entire generation of comedians rehearsed not just their jokes, but their walk to that couch, praying for the wave that would rewrite their future in real time. But here's what nobody tells you about power like that. The same hand that can lift you up learns, eventually, that it can just as easily let you fall. And Johnny Carson's hand fell on more people than anyone in Hollywood dared admit out loud. Nobody screamed. Nobody made a scene. That was never how it worked. A comedian would simply stop getting the call back. A name would quietly vanish from the guest list. Bookers who once fought over your calendar would suddenly go silent. And if you asked around, all you get was a shrug, a knowing look, a whispered you know how it is. No explanation. No appeal. You were simply erased from a conversation you didn't even know you'd been kicked out of. For most people watching at home, none of this ever registered. They tuned in for the monologue, the sketches, the effortless charm of a man who somehow made comedy look like breathing. They didn't see what happened after the cameras cut. The careers quietly buried, the friendships that dissolved into permanent silence, the guest chairs that stayed empty for reasons no one would ever confirm. To understand how one man built a kingdom on charm and enforced it with silence, you have to go back to a scrappy kid from Nebraska who once called himself the Great Carsoni and did card tricks for relatives who had no idea they were watching the birth of an empire. He served in the Navy, studied radio and speech, paid his dues in forgettable local gigs, and then, almost by accident, filled in for Jack Benny one night and discovered something rare in himself. He wasn't just funny. He was effortless. And effortless, in television, is a superpower. By 1962, he was behind the Tonight Show desk, and for the next 3 decades, he didn't just host a program. He built the architecture that every late-night show since is borrowed from, stolen from, and never quite matched. The monologue, the desk bits, the parade of guests trading easy banter with a host who somehow made 20 million people feel like they were the only ones in the room. Jimmy Fallon uses it. Jimmy Kimmel uses it. Stephen Colbert uses it tonight, this very week, without a second thought about where it came from. And that's exactly why the fall from his grace hurt so much. Because Johnny didn't just open doors. For 3 decades, he was a door, which meant that when he shut one, it stayed shut. Nobody learned that lesson more painfully than the woman he once called, live on national television, the girl America was going to be hearing a lot about. Her name was Joan Rivers, and before Carson found her, she was 31 years old and already being told she was washed up. She was hustling through comedy clubs for scraps, absorbing rejection after rejection, when Johnny put her in front of his audience and, with one unscripted line, changed the entire direction of her life. Overnight, she went from invisible to indispensable, a writer for his show, his protege, eventually the only person he trusted enough to sit in his chair when he needed a night off. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect pair, the king of late night and the fearless queen he'd personally crowned. What the audience never saw was a quiet architecture dependency underneath that friendship, the unspoken understanding that Joan's entire ascent existed at Johnny's pleasure, and that gratitude in his world was expected to look a certain way: loyal, permanent, unquestioning. In 1986, Fox offered her the chance to make history, her own late-night show, the first ever hosted by a woman. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became the most devastating rupture of her career, because Joan had quietly learned something from NBC executives that broke her heart before Johnny ever said a word. They had no intention of giving her the Tonight Show when Carson eventually stepped aside. She wasn't even being considered. So she said yes to Fox. And in the chaos of that decision, in the fear of how to even say the words out loud, she made one fatal mistake. She let Johnny find out secondhand. He didn't yell. He didn't rage the way people expected a wounded man to rage. What he did was worse. He went completely, permanently silent. He wouldn't take her calls. He wouldn't open her letters. For the rest of his life, Joan Rivers ceased to exist in Johnny Carson's world. And because his silence carried the weight of an unwritten decree, she ceased to exist for much of the industry, too. Anyone who dared appear on her new show found their own invitations to his couch quietly withdrawn. It wasn't a rule anyone had to state out loud. Everyone simply understood it. For years afterward, Joan tried to reach him, a letter every single year, hoping this might finally be the one that got a response. None ever came. In interviews decades later, her voice still cracked, describing him as the single most important figure in her career, the man who saw something in her when no one else would. And in one of the most quietly devastating things she ever said publicly, she offered her own theory for his fury. "I think he really felt because I was a woman that I just was his, that I wouldn't leave him. Not business, not betrayal in the ordinary sense. Possession dressed up as principle." When Johnny Carson died in 2005, without ever answering her, Joan admitted she wept, not for the cultural icon the world had lost, but for the men who she'd lost twice. Once when he stopped speaking to her, and again when death made the silence permanent. Joan's story is the deepest wound in Carson's history, but was far from the only one. Silence, it turned out, was a signature weapon, and he wielded it on people for reasons that ranged from serious betrayal to almost nothing at all. Rich Lil mocked him one too many times in his impressions, and was quietly told his material had gone stale. A polite excuse for a door closing forever. Dana Carvey did a pitch-perfect Carson impersonation while promoting a movie, and though Johnny never said a public word about it, Carvey never appeared on the show again. A young, still improving comedian named Howie Mandel once brought out a giant stuffed tiger as a surprise prop, unapproved and untested. A harmless bit of silliness at Carson, a man who despised losing control of his own stage, never forgave. No formal ban, no angry phone call, just cold, permanent silence. The same silence that ended Joan's decades-long friendship, deployed here over something as small as a stuffed toy. Some crossed him by accident. Others crossed him by simply being braver than the room could handle, like Lola Falana, who once used her platform to speak honestly about racism in an industry too frightened to have that conversation on primetime television. America wasn't ready to hear it, and neither, it turned out, was Johnny. She never got another invitation. And some crossed him in ways that had nothing to do with him at all. Bobcat Goldthwait set a chair on fire live on air during Jay Leno's tenure, a stunt so reckless it ended in an arson conviction and a permanent exile from the desk Carson had built. Kathy Griffin's unapologetic edge made her simply incompatible with the standards Carson had spent 30 years enforcing, standards that outlived his own hosting run entirely. The pattern beneath every single one of these stories was the same. It was never really about the joke, the tiger, the timing, or even the disloyalty. It was about control, the same obsessive need for control that made Johnny Carson magnetic on camera and unreachable off it. Friends who thought they'd broken through his charm learned, often the hard way, that there was a wall behind a smile that never fully came down. That same wall shaped his 4 marriages, each one ending in its own quiet collapse, each one covered over with a joke about ex-wives taking everything but his cufflinks. Laughter used as armor for something that clearly still hurt. It shaped his relationship with his son Rick, who struggled for years against addiction and the crushing weight of being the child of the most beloved man in America, and who died in a car accident in 1991, while that wall between father and son was still standing. Those who saw Carson on television afterward said something in him had visibly, permanently changed. When he retired the following year, he didn't linger the way most legends do. He didn't chase one more special, one more interview, one more round of applause. He simply disappeared to Malibu, spent his days on a boat, and let the world wonder about a man that had watched every single night for 30 years, yet somehow never really knew. That contradiction is the truest thing anyone can say about Johnny Carson. On stage, he was warmth itself, quick, generous, magnetic, a man who could make you feel like his closest friend from behind a desk and a camera lens. Off stage, he was a fortress, capable of loving people fiercely and then erasing them completely the moment he felt his control slip. He built the blueprint every late-night host since has quietly borrowed. The monologue, the couch, the easy intimacy with millions of strangers, and he enforced the terms of that blueprint with silence, so total it could end careers without a single public word. He left behind no memoir, no tell-all confession explaining any of it. Just old tape, still airing in reruns, laughter still echoing across a stage he abandoned decades ago. And somewhere in a box that was never opened, a stack of unanswered letters. Proof that even a man who mastered the art of connecting with an entire nation couldn't bring himself to forgive the one person who'd loved him enough to keep writing anyway.